Chapter 1: Structure and Function of Skin Structures. Introduction. No study of dermatology would be complete without understanding exactly what the basic structure of the skin looks like and the function of the various skin parts. In this chapter, the reader will take a brief look at the various parts of the skin, including the epidermis, dermis, and hypodermis. Each of these layers has specific functions inside the skin, and each has the potential to develop diseases, which are the topic of other chapters of this book. By understanding the normal skin structure and function, the reader can tell whether there is pathology that can be identified in a gross evaluation of the skin or in a skin biopsy. The skin can easily be identified as the largest organ of the body. It is approximately 2 to 4 millimeters thick and, if separated from the body, would weigh approximately 5 kilograms. It consists of multiple layers that have as their major function the protection of the body from exterior forces, such as heat, invasion of pathogens, UV radiation, mechanical trauma, and excesses or deficiencies of the humidity in the environment. Some internal functions of the skin, to be discussed later, include playing a strong role in the immune system, the synthesis of vitamin D, the ability to gather sensory information, the storage of water, the regulation of body temperature, and the storage of fat. There are two different kinds of skin. There is skin that contains hair and skin that does not contain hair. Skin varies according to its thickness and texture, with some areas of skin being very thin and friable, and other areas of the skin being calloused and rough. Some areas of skin are highly responsible for sensations, and therefore have many sensory fibers within the skin. Other areas of skin have very little sensation, are thicker, and resist shear forces. Skin structure. There are 3 basic layers to the skin. Each has its own thickness, function, and strength. The outermost layer is known as the epidermis. Its main function is the protection of underlying structures. The epidermis can be as little as 0.05 millimeters thick or as much as 1.5 millimeters, depending on where in the body one measures the thickness of this layer. The middle layer is the dermis, and the innermost layer is the hypodermis. The eyelids have the thinnest skin, while the soles of the feet have the thickest skin. Epidermis. Important cells in the epidermis include the Langerhans cells, important immune cells, Merkel cells, sensory receptors, parts of sensory nerve cells, and melanocytes, cells that make the pigment known as melanin. There are 5 different sublayers of the epidermis that slough off and are rebuilt on a regular basis as the body goes through the everyday stresses on the skin. Epidermal layers. Stratum corneum. This is the outermost epidermal layer, which consists of 10 to 30 thin stratified layers of dead keratinocytes that are constantly shedding from the skin. It is also referred to as the horny skin layer because of the toughness of this layer. The epidermis completely turns itself over every 28 to 50 days, with slower turnover rates happening in the elderly. Stratum lucidum. This is just deep to the stratum corneum and contains squamous cells that are drying out in anticipation of being dead keratinocytes as cells continue to turn over. These cells are tightly adherent to one another to help provide a barrier function to the skin. Stratum granulosum. It is hard to distinguish this layer from the stratum lucidum. It too contains cells that are gradually drying out and migrating toward the stratum corneum to provide a major protective function for the skin. Squamous cell layer. This is the next deepest layer in the epidermis. It is also referred to as the spiny layer or stratum spinosum because the cells have spiny projections that adhere them to one another. These represent basal cells, the deepest layer of cells, that have matured and have been pushed outward as the epidermis is being turned over. This layer is the thickest of all of the epidermal skin layers. These squamous cells are also referred to as keratinocytes because they make the keratin, which is the protective protein that makes up several non-cell skin structures, including the hair and nails. The Langerhans cells are in this layer and act as immune cells by attaching to antigens that get into the skin. By doing so, they alert the immune system to become activated to kill the pathogen associated with the antigen. Basal layer. This is the innermost segment of the epidermis. Histologically, it consists of multiple small round cells that have mitotic activity and that push up through the epidermis to make new squamous cells, or keratinocytes, and ultimately the stratum corneum. This layer can also be called the stratum germinativum because it is the germ cell layer for the epidermis. The melanocytes can be found in the basal layer and produce melanin, which pigments the skin. This is the layer that protects the body from UV light by making protective melanin to cover deeper structures. The Merkel cells, sensory cells, of the skin are in the basal layer. Dermal layers. The dermis is the second or middle layer of skin and is the thickest part, being between 1.5 mm to 3 mm thick and accounting for 90% of the skin's thickness. The main function of this layer is to regulate the body temperature and supply nutrients to the epidermis, which has no blood vessels for nourishment. The dermis is also a big storage layer for water and contains most of the special structures of the skin. The blood vessels for the dermis and epidermis are in the dermis. They provide nutrients to the skin and take waste products away from the tissues. Vitamin D produced by the skin is picked up by small capillaries and is then sent to other body areas. There are lymph vessels in the dermis as well, which assist in the immune defense mechanisms in the skin. Hair follicles are present around hairs on parts of the skin that are not hairless. There are about 3 million sweat glands in the dermis, which are of two types. There are apocrine glands, found in the armpits and pubic areas only, and which have the capacity to produce body odor. There are also eccrine glands, which are found throughout the body and are responsible for the regulation of body temperature by secreting water and electrolytes when the body reaches a certain set temperature and needs to cool off. Because these glands secrete mostly water, there is very little body odor associated with these glands. Sebaceous glands are attached to the hair follicles and are found in all places of the body except for the bottoms of the feet and the palms of the hands. They secrete an oil that lubricates the skin and keeps the skin waterproof. Oil produced by these glands has mild antimicrobial activity. The dermis contains all the nerve endings in the skin. There are nerve endings for pain sensation, light touch sensation, pressure sensation, vibratory sensation, temperature sensation, itching sensation, and discriminatory touch sensation. Information from these receptors goes to the brain for interpretation. The main connective tissue structure of the dermis involves the collagen and elastin proteins, which are made by the fibroblasts. These are specialized skin cells that give the skin its elasticity and strength. Collagen is more resistant and tougher than elastin, but elastin allows for the stretching ability of the skin, so both proteins are necessary as part of the dermis. The dermis consists of two sublayers. The upper layer is called the papillary layer, which contains a thin layer of collagen fibers. It is responsible for temperature regulation and for the support of the dermis. There is an extensive vascular system in this layer that provides nutrients to both the dermis and epidermis. The dilatation or constriction of this vasculature helps control the temperature of the skin. Beneath the papillary layer is the reticular layer, which is thicker and made of thick parallel collagen fibers. This layer has a higher density than the papillary dermis and has as its main function the production of the strength and elasticity of the skin. Because the tissue is so supportive, It provides a good structure for the various skin components, such as the sebaceous glands, the sweat glands, and the hair follicles. The subcutaneous layer, hypodermis. The subcutaneous layer is the innermost lining of the skin. It is basically connective tissue laid out in a network of fat cells and collagen-producing cells. This can also be called the subcutaneous layer or the hypodermis. It helps insulate the body and preserve body heat. It is a good shock absorber and varies in thickness depending on the weight of the individual and the area of the body being assessed. Because this part stores fat, it can provide an energy source for the dermis. Like the dermis, this layer has blood cells, lymph vessels, nerves, and some hair follicles.